I mean, the Soviet Union did a lot of good things for the sort of satellite regions insofar as, and for Russia as well, to be honest. I mean, the provision of like healthcare, just basic amenities, and the infrastructure that was provided through that have supported these countries till this day. And I think to pass sweeping judgment on something like the Soviet Union,
sure,
and all the sort of negative stereotypes that are associated with that.
Sure, but it's not a sweeping statement to say that historically 100 million people died under various forms of socialism throughout between the middle of the 19th century and the collapse of the Berlin Wall, for example. And like when the Berlin Wall fell down, which side did they run to?
Yeah.
What's your opinion with regards to the effectiveness of communism overall, in fairness?
Yeah, well, I think to associate communism with the sort of Soviet communism, I mean, those are two different things. I mean, if you're looking at communism as a sort of ideology, I mean, you can sort of understand that as something completely different to what the eventual sort of manipulated, corrupt sort of Soviet system became. And whilst I wouldn't subscribe to communism, I can see the merits within it as opposed to something where we are now.
Sure. So most importantly on that's very important. You can see the merits of it on paper and in theory, I presume, but historically, empirically, it's just not a viable option.
I think that would be a fair statement to make. I mean, I'm not fully informed on any sort of positive or successful communist states, but I mean, you look at countries in Eastern Europe now, and you will find a lot of individuals, perhaps that have been sort of grown up in that era, that sort of reminisce on the sort of the simplicities of the communist era and the basic provisions that it provided. So, I mean, you can look at facts insofar as deaths. I mean, that you're not looking at a happy regime. You're not looking at something that's looked after its citizens or looked after citizens of other sort of countries, but
minorities within those regimes.
Well, I mean,
religious dissident, political dissidents.
Well, I mean, I think the Eurasian region in general is one of the most ethnically diverse in the world, and to say that, I wouldn't say that communism wouldn't have crushed those. It's sort of, I think the necessary legacies of communism was bringing in this sort of amalgamation of different ethnicities, and whilst that might be, you might say that they've been individually persecuted, it was still quite an ethnically diverse regime.
Sure, but just finishing off economically, the history books read what they read, and theory versus practice, we know two different things. Sanitation levels, poverty levels, access to food, just the basics in life, food and water, heating, etc. Religious persecution, ethnic cleansing, genocide, these are all in the books associated with the men who took control at the helm, and we know that whilst it's potentially, if I may, it's a nice idea in theory, unfortunately it's not compatible with our species. Historically, that's been, not future tense, historically, that seems to be what's written in the history books.
Yeah, I mean, that's not an entirely incorrect statement. I mean, I don't want to be completely, I'd rather view that argument with a little bit of pessimism, but obviously you've got to accept historical facts, and I think, yeah, I mean, true to your point, there's been no
so far.
Yeah, exactly.
So far, it's not worked out.
No, not today.
Do you support communism?
Yes, I do.
Why is that?
Mainly because I don't support the government that we have right now, and I feel that the policies that they have in place are not for the people. And I think a lot of the ideas that go along with communism are for the people. So, as a person, not of the highest 1% or those in power, I do feel that the working man or woman should be supporting communism.
When you say the government, do you mean, a lot of people say there's not much difference between Conservative and Labour, it's a two-party state and all that stuff. Do you mean, would you be in favour of Labour over Conservative?
It would be slightly better, but I don't particularly support their views either.
It's not far left enough.
No.
So communism, the way I understand it is that it's an ideology that what people say when they critique it is great idea, usual stuff, great idea, but in reality, people end up ruining it.
Yeah, and they often use the ideas of like Cuba, and they start talking about the USSR as well, and saying, oh, see, look, we've tried to put it in practice and it's not. But the thing is, if you look at the ideas that were actually happening in those states, they were not the ideas of communism, and they were just a dictatorship, so you can't use those.
It was used by the Stalins and the rest.
Exactly.
It was used to hijack, so they can, and I think Hitler did it to an extent as well, and profited massively.
Exactly, so you can't sort of use those as points as why communism didn't work.
So why hasn't it worked then? So if we're agreeing with each other here, and I'm following your logic, why doesn't it work then?
Well, one, it hasn't been put in place, really. I honestly don't know enough on the subject because, again, I do natural sciences. I am, for my own benefit, only interested in communism.
Sure. But you're a voter, your opinion matters.
Yeah.
So.
But I think it hasn't worked just because I just think the world wasn't really ready for it, and maybe that we haven't just done enough and as a people to, or sort of made enough noise or taken control enough of ourselves. And as humans, we are genuinely quite lazy, and I will put myself in that. And sometimes we just accept the consequences of our own actions.
We get on with life.
Yeah, we get on with life. We say, we voted these people in, okay, the majority want this, whatever, let it slide. Whatever policies they make, we're not going to really kick up a fuss. And I think it's upon the people to sort of take responsibility and take action.
Sure. So when you say, so 2 points there, it's not really been given a chance, it's not been tried, all the same sort of point, but also it's not relatively new, as you say, but it hasn't had a chance. I'm hearing that. It was about the middle of the 19th century, so it was 1850, 1860, where all this came through, and obviously you'll know the basic timeline from there. So it's like 150 years for it to take off, and as you say, it hasn't really...
It's not very... That's, if you think about it, like, for example, the state of America, or the United States of America, that's only, 400 years old?
Quite.
And, like, all these policies that we've put in, and this stuff hasn't had time to develop as an evolutionary perspective. It hasn't had time to develop, and we, as a society, we are quite young. So I think that sort of you just got to do your own part for what you believe in, and sort of not just listen to everybody who's saying, "Oh, this hasn't worked because of this," or just sort of stick up for what you believe in, basically.
Sure. Do you see any, just finally, do you see any major issues critiquing, if you're a proponent of communism, do you see any major issues occurring if you were critiquing it yourself as a result of a communist state, for example? So North Korea, China, Vietnam,
obviously there's
Laos.
The view of like utopia, and like the sort of a communist state doesn't sort of revolve around this sort of idealistic utopia. But I feel that the more steps we go to as a society to making society more about society and governmental politics more about society, I think the better. So although that we don't reach it, or what the state of communism would be, I think that if we just try and sort of make things for the people, that idea sort of embedded into the government would make for a better future.
Okay, that makes sense. I appreciate your time. Do you support communism?
No.
Why not?
I haven't seen it in an effective version yet.
So on paper, sounds good, looks good, is good, collectivism, etc., etc. Hasn't, about 150 years it's been around for, mid-19th century, hasn't worked anywhere, disastrous consequences, nice idea in theory, but in practice...
Yeah, in theory, great, it's incompatible with human nature, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. So we just had a little chat, and I asked what she thinks about communism, and you very kindly said, look, it's not my sphere of expertise. So let me lead then. So communism is the idea that the state knows best, and that the means of production and wealth should all be controlled at the centre, and it's divvied out so that we're all totally equal within society because it's nice and fair.
Yes.
Off the bat, what would you have said to that political ideology? Just that 5-second soundbite alone.
I think occasionally, people like having this idea of equality and everybody have the same thing, at first seems good potentially, but then when you look deeper into it, you kind of, I think potentially it's a case for uprising in the sense that people who potentially work for longer hours, doctors, medics, that kind of thing.
Lawyers, architects.
Yeah.
Brain surgeons.
Some kind of unfairness in that. I mean, potentially it might work in certain circumstances, but not for all. I don't
So
think.
off the bat, from my 5-second soundbite, I was being as polite about it as I could be, literally, you're saying that actually, hang on a minute, meritocracy is more important. So X human, Y human, Z human, they all work, they all come from their backgrounds, and it should be done based on merit. In terms of success and fruits in life, it's fairness that's more important, not everyone gets the same equally distributed by a central body.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough to say. That's what I was saying. Yeah.
I think it's fair enough to say that's fair enough, actually. I think that's absolutely... So if I was to ask you, where has communism worked, would you know off the bat anywhere where it's worked?
I mean, no. I think you can look at like Russians' history and kind of observe that from afar and think, well, what happened there?
Yeah.
But no, off the top of my head, I wouldn't know anywhere where it has worked. No.
Okay, cool. So North Korea, China, Laos, Vietnam. So that's not me saying that's where it's worked. That's me saying where it's present, and then you've got your Venezuela and your Cuba, etc. And guess what happens at the helm when you give someone all that power?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, obviously North Korea is quite a closed-off country. Not many people know much about it. But
working conditions, human rights, genocide, ethnic cleansing, poverty, death. I mean, I could do this all day.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And that's the history books, not me.
Yes, so no, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. No, I don't think it works in many places at all, if any. So yeah, that's
Star interview. Thank you. Do you support communism?
No, not really.
Why not?
I feel like it's not really works out in the past, so just from like historical proof, I guess.
Historically, it's not worked out very well.
No. I mean, yeah, not really. And it feels like countries that are lean more that way now don't really have the best living conditions, the people who live there.
Human rights, living conditions, work environments.
Exactly those things. But I mean, we only have like a few to go off of, so
Sure.
I don't know, maybe there would be a way, but I mean, it doesn't really seem like it works out.
Sure. Do you support communism?
No.
Why?
Right, so I'm studying at this university. I'm trying my hardest to go up the ranks, basically. I feel like with communism, there are some aspects that I do agree with. I would say in an ideal world, there is that aspect of having everyone grouped together and sort of support each other. That does make sense. But I feel like in a lot of places, not even just in the UK, actually across the world, I would say, there is someone who fails to follow the plan, basically. And that sort of leads to some sort of power politics that just doesn't seem to make sense. It's a good ideal to reach for, but I just don't feel that it's achievable, at least for a lot of places.
So we can buy into a degree of collectivism. We can do that on paper.
Yeah.
In theory, it works. Historically, how has it worked out? From you, as a history student, historically, how has it worked out?
I haven't really seen it work out historically. Although I have seen like the attempts do make sense sometimes, I would say, and I do think as well, just looking historically, there have also been people who were involved with communism who also had good ideas, but a lot of them were ideas in practice they didn't really pan out.
So can you give our audience an example of just one, and there are quite a few, negative consequence of communism, from your opinion?
So I would say, if you were trying to be a doctor, for instance, right, you would be studying years to be a doctor. You would do the stress, you'd do all the commitment, and you'd be trying to rise up the ranks that way. And then there would be someone else who might not have done those achievements, might not have struggled, etc. And you're sort of supporting them as well. It's that sort of thing that
It's not fair.
It's not fair. But I can see why people would like it in an ideal world. Right?
But in practice, meritocracy needs to guide us, right?
Yeah.
You work hard.
Yeah. So I'd say capitalism doesn't have... I feel like there are issues with capitalism as well. But at the same time, I feel like out of the two currently, I feel like capitalism, at least for us,
We're an imperfect species in an imperfect world, right?
Yeah.
So freedom of movement, freedom of finance, and freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Would you argue that those are the three founding pillars, arguably, for our limited species? God bless us. Those are our three freedoms, right?
I would say that, especially in the West, I would say that is our three freedoms.
Freedom of religion, I suppose, is a fourth.
Yes.
How's that worked out under communism?
Not the best. So see, that's the thing. I feel like maybe in another part of the world, communism can work, but I just feel like here.
I think when I deconstruct communism with people, everyone always goes to, you mentioned about unfair, how about ethnic cleansing, how about genocide, how about poverty, immeasurable in poverty, immeasurable suffering. You chose unfairness, you chose that route, and they're all valid answers. When I unpack communism to people, they always talk about the devastations or pros or cons or the assessment of economics, not about that of culture. That's what I find. You've mentioned it's not fair. Let's go with the economics for a second in closing. Why should a bricklayer get paid the same amount as a neuroscientist or as a CEO or as a brain surgeon or as a cancer specialist or an oncologist? Sorry, what?
I would say with that, right, I can't deny that if you do still want to do those jobs that take a lot more time to do, right, it does actually show that you do have your heart in it. You are doing it for your purpose, for your sort of vocation in a way. But at the same time, I do feel like it's unfair. And there are some people who are fine with that. I don't think I'm fine with that currently. That might change in the future, but...
Well, I think let's look at what a lot of left-wing students, I say left-wing, left-leaning, left-wing, far left, look at the movement behind wanting nurses to be paid more. But they would a lot of those students would identify as Marxists or communists.
Yeah.
But they want nurses to be paid so much more. So we notice pay gaps, we notice differences with payment as a definition of being alive and needing to earn money for warmth and food, don't we?
Yeah, I think a lot of those students, they are taking elements of communism that are attractive, I would say. Yeah, so I'm not sure if they agree with all elements of communism, but they see there are some attractive elements that people can sort of draw to with communism. So that might be what they're looking into.
Sure. Rather than the fully fledged total state control.
Yeah, I think it's probably like taking parts of it that makes sense, and then they're part of capitalism that also makes sense.
And in that vein, we get when we interview students, we get reference to Scandinavia and to social democracy an awful lot. But that, if we can agree, that is not the same as communism.
No.
Thanks for your time, mate. Do you support communism?
No, I don't necessarily.
Neither.
Neither?
No.
Why?
Because I don't agree with the values of communism. I think that it would impair, communism would not go towards progress. I mean, it would impair progress, because if you put everyone at the same level, you don't have a possibility of evolving in your own life. I think that the management of resources, if done well, can be great for the society, but I don't.
But if not done well?
But if not done well, we've already had example
from history.
Yeah, exactly. USSR, or that didn't go really well, and that resulted in millions of deaths.
USSR is a good one, and also when the Berlin Wall came down, which side did people run to?
Yeah, to the west side. So.
What about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think some ideas of communism are really good, but if you take them separately and integrate them to other political systems, but communism itself can't really be a solution for, as he said, a society that can evolve and provide people with what they have to have a good development indicator and all.
Communism, if you look it up, is a far left ideology. That's what it comes under. But in Britain, you'll know that people in the media talk about far right, but they never talk about far left. You'll never hear about far left. We understand that a lot of our universities have become woke, and we see Marxism signs everywhere for the 2023 rally, which I actually know about last year, etc. So we seem to see this left-wing leaning bias in our universities. I actually think it's far more insidious than that. I think it's actually far left. What are your thoughts on that? Do you hear more about far right than far left in the UK? Even in Europe, actually, to be honest with you. I don't hear about far left in the media.
We're French. So
is that where the accent? I was trying to work out the accent.
Yeah, the accent, we're French. So Yeah, in France you hear a lot about far left as well.
Oh, really?
Like, yeah, because
A bit less, I think.
bit less, but like mainly like last elections that happened this year, not of last year actually, there was like a great number of young people voted for far left,
Yeah.
and more like, and so there was like not great deal of attention, but there was a lot of extremes that surged in France because the more like the more conventional parties, if I can say, were less. There was less attention on them and way more attention on like extremes.
Possibly a media drive behind that. When you say less attention,
Yeah, I'd say.
definitely seems to be an undercurrent in our institutions, but no one seems to be talking about it at all. Communism's regressive and it impairs progress, and you've explained why. Because ultimately, you're asking people to control at the centre, and historically, that hasn't worked out very well. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I think that problem is you're deciding to put a certain number of people at the power, and you're asking them to not be greedy about it and to just to just distribute the resources equally, but that's never going to happen because.
Nice idea in theory.
Yeah, in theory, like that could work because everyone would be at the same level. But even in theory, I think that on like a human level, individual level, you could not evolve as an individual or progress because why would you do? I don't know. Why would you want to become a doctor? Do 7-8 years of studies just to earn the same wage as someone that didn't do anything. Like not didn't do anything, but that didn't.
You can map that onto anything, can't you? Architects,
exactly.
biologists, lawyers, anything. You could map it
And
on. Where's the incentive if everyone's the same?
Why would you want to work more if it's to earn the same? Obviously, it's not all about money. It's about what you want to do in life, what you're passionate about. But at the same time, it's an important factor. It's going to impact like your. I don't think that technologically, in terms of technology, we're not going to evolve because if engineers are paid the same as someone that works, which is a respectable job as well, but that didn't do as much studies or that didn't study as well, he's not going to want to do more, try to like develop something, a new technology.
Cardiology, neurology,
Exactly.
all of it.
In terms of medicine, and I think you're going to stall rather than evolve. And even in terms of resources, I don't think that you can equally distribute all the resources. If you put a small number of people at the power and then with all the resources,
There'd be no corruption there, would there? There'd be no corruption there at all, would there?
No, exactly. Like corruption is going to happen. They're going to obviously keep money for themselves. It's what's happening. Not in a lot of African countries, but like in a lot of African countries, you can see like a great deal of corruption.
Yeah.
And then it's going to impact like the life of a lot of people. It's going to impact the life of the country, like the jobs, the resources, the food.
Historically, all of it, sanitary, everything, all of it, just basic living standards.
Yeah, exactly.
Historically, as I think to your point, you mentioned, actually typically suffer tremendously under those regimes. When I interview people about this and I ask this question whether it's socialism or communism, they often say it was never given a chance and that Western imperialism has always stopped it. And I say back to that, I say it's a cute answer, but there's a reason why sometimes good overcomes evil.
Yeah,
It's not all a conspiracy theory. Sometimes there's an agenda behind everything, but sometimes good honestly overcomes evil. I think that as you've got issues with free market economics and disparities, but also the last thing we want is for any of our freedoms to be impinged upon. Freedom of speech, freedom to move, and free market, right? And we want to feed our families and we want to explore our potential.
yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that sentiment?
I agree with that.
Common sense. I like it. Awesome, guys. Thank you. Is there any particular reason why you don't support communism?
I just don't know enough about it at the moment to judge well. So
It's a pretty good reason. And to be fair, we speak to history students. Natural sciences is big here, and chemical sciences and all these other different sciences. So doesn't matter what you're studying; it's just your honest opinion. I notice an accent. Can I ask where you're from?
Luxembourg.
Yeah. So do you know anything about communism? If you were to say one thing about communism that you knew about from Europe, from the world, from whatever.
I mean, I know it's if I think of communism, I think of the Soviet Union.
USSR.
I'll think, yeah, USSR. I'll think of Eastern Europe. That's just what comes to mind straight away.
And when you think of those two, that's perfect. And that's factually accurate. When you think of those regions from that period of time, what do you think of? Do you think of societies thriving? Do you think of success? Do you think of prosperity? Or do you think of basically disaster?
Honestly, no. The ideas I have of it is that it comes... Usually the population on a general doesn't do so well with communism. And yeah, like most of the population is left out, kind of. They're not really included. That's what I know, but I don't know much.
There can be some notable consequences from communism when you control at the centre, as you say, whether it's a general, whether it's heavy on military. When someone is controlling at the centre and everyone else must do as they're told, there's some potential negative
exactly.
consequences.
Yeah,
and that's putting it really fairly. I think that's really.
Yeah, from what I know, they just don't listen to the minorities' opinions and they just oppress them. That's just how I'm educated, at least.
I think that's fantastic. Lastly, do you think that within our British educational institutions, do you think that we are surrounded by Marxists and young communists right now who actually don't know what you've just said, which is that I don't know much about communism? Turns out you do actually know quite a lot about communism. It's potentially very harmful to the minorities, and yet we have a massive movement in Britain, woke left, that are in support of nothing but minorities, and they would also identify as Marxist and communist.
It's funny you asked that, because just yesterday here while walking in UCL, I got a Marxist UCL student coming up to me with the leaflets and asking me if I would be interested to join the society and go have the talks with them about Marxism, like pro-Marxism. So I think you can see it quite often here, UCL students who support Marxism and communists. And I mean also because it's a very international university, so there's many. And like Chinese, for example, I know a couple Chinese friends who are communist. And I mean, that doesn't really affect our relationship, but I just know that's a fact.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I can confirm from the work we do at universities, there is a heavy Marxist communist presence that are legitimised via societies, which the SU has to endorse and approve. I can confirm that's very much true, and there's stickers all over UCL outside about the Marxism Festival.